With any Milestone installation, the management server components are always installed first. If you're installing our Essential Plus or Express Plus software, you will most likely be performing an all-in-one single computer installation. Pro Plus, Expert, and Corporate users can choose this also. However, since those are typically larger systems, they will most likely not use this option. If you choose Single Computer, all the server components, including the mobile server and client software, will be installed onto this single machine, and it will be configured to work immediately. Just be sure to direct your video storage location to your dedicated video storage drive, proceed through the questions, and after the installation process completes, you'll be up and running. For single computer installations, toward the end of the install process, the system will give you a chance to add cameras, select a storage drive, and even add users. Feel free to take advantage of this feature if you like. For small systems, it can be quite convenient. However, for the purposes of this video series, we'll be setting these things up in greater detail within the Management Client software, all of which will be covered later in this video series. For our users installing Professional Plus, Expert, and Corporate, they will most likely choose Distributed or Custom. Distributed installs only the management server and the other server components that will most often reside with the management server machine. It assumes that the recording server, management server, and mobile server, along with the viewing software, will all be installed on different hardware. However, most users setting up a large system, or for those wanting a little more installation flexibility, will typically choose Custom instead. You'll notice when choosing Custom that you are unable to uncheck the management server option. This is by design, as this installer is intended for setting up a machine that always includes a management server. You'll also notice that recording server is not checked by default, as that is expected to be installed onto a different server machine, and mobile server is not listed as an option, but don't worry, we'll later show you how to install this software onto dedicated hardware. Remember, Essential Plus and Express Plus are only allowed a single recording server, so unless these users wish to install the mobile server onto separate hardware, they will typically not be using this option, and may wish to skip ahead to the next video segment in this series. For the purposes of our demonstration today, we'll choose Custom, and illustrate the installation of the software components onto multiple computers. For this setup, we'll create a management server, a recording server, and a mobile server, all in a non-domain controller environment. As we click Continue, we can now choose if we're going to install the default SQL Express onto this computer, or if we're going to use an existing SQL server. If you anticipate your system growing beyond 300 cameras, you'll need to have Microsoft SQL Standard or above installed and running on either this machine or elsewhere on the network, and you'll define that server information here. For these situations, you'll need to have database administrator rights during the installation process while the database is created, after which the privileges may be lowered. For this demonstration, however, we'll say the system's going to stay under 300 cameras and just go with the built-in SQL Express installation. Next, we have a choice of installing the software using a specific service account. This comes into play most often with a domain-controlled environment where you may need to specify a domain service account for all of your server installations if they'll be archiving to shared storage. Otherwise, using network services is just fine. In a workgroup environment, all the computers running Milestone servers must share the same user account and password, and will use network service, as we will for this example. Next, we choose where the Milestone software will be installed. This is most often on the C drive, along with the operating system. Choose your product language, and then click Install. When the installation completes, we'll have our management server installed, and we can see its current status represented in the lower right tray icon. Now that our management server is installed, we'll move on to installing the recording server. Here we see a new computer on the network where we will install our recording server software. The recording server installer will always be downloaded directly from the management server. This gives you an installer that is exclusively used for creating recording servers and has the advantage of downloading much faster over your LAN. There are two URLs you will need to remember: installation and installation/admin. Open a web browser and type in the server name or IP address of your management server, followed by a slash, followed by installation. The resulting screen is where you can quickly download the Smart Client software right from your server. If you have a lot of computers that still need the 32-bit version of the Smart Client software, you can download and install the server-side 32-bit client onto the management server. Once that's installed, you'll see that version in the list here as well. However, we're looking for the management client software, so if you add /admin to the URL and log in with a valid Windows account credential, you can now get a page where you can download the various server components you might want to run on dedicated hardware, as well as the management client software, which allows you to manage your Milestone system from almost any computer. We're looking for the recording server software, which we find here and download. We then run the installer to create a new recording server on this machine. Once again, we have several installation options to choose from, including the option to install a failover server instead of a recording server. However, in this case, we just want a standard recording server, so choosing typical will satisfy the vast majority of users. Next, we need to input the management server's name or IP address. Be sure to leave the :80 after it, and choose the drive where your video will be stored. Remember, this is a dedicated drive or drive array that has been formatted to a 64K allocation unit size with drive indexing turned off. Additionally, if the server is equipped with antivirus software, the proper exceptions need to be made for the video storage drive locations and the application files. The Milestone Administrator Manual covers this in great detail. In this case, our video storage drive letter is E. Choose the software installation location, which will typically be on the C drive with the operating system, and proceed. The installation will progress and eventually complete. Normally, I'll also take this moment to switch the display mode of the lower right tray icons to ensure that the Milestone server icon is always showing. That way, you can check the system status with just a quick glance. Note that the first time you run the recording server software, or the first time you run the recording server after installing a new camera device pack, the recording software will take longer to initially start up. During this time, its icon will remain yellow, and sometimes may take as long as 5 minutes before it turns green. After that initial first startup process has completed, however, subsequent restarts of the software in the future occur very quickly. When the startup process completes, your icon will either turn green, indicating it's running and ready to operate, or, depending on your network configuration and software edition, it may appear with a question mark symbol the first time it starts up. The question mark symbol indicates that the recording server needs to be authorized. To do that, you simply log into the management client software, click on the recording servers, locate your newly added system, right-click on it, and choose Authorize. Your recording server icon will then turn green, indicating it's ready for normal operation. For the last of our installations, it's time to install our mobile server. Here we have a third computer that will be our future mobile server. Once again, we need to launch a web browser, go to the server's IP or computer name, followed by installation/admin. Log in using the computer's Windows credentials, only this time we'll be downloading the mobile server installer instead of the recording server. Note that the mobile server needs to connect to your system with an account that has admin privileges. If you were doing an all-in-one installation, this is simply the network service account that the host computer used. However, in this situation, we need to provide Milestone admin account credentials for it to connect to Milestone. Since we're not on a domain, we'll handle this by setting up a local Milestone user account that we'll just call mobile. We'll do this by returning to the management client, clicking on Basic Users, and establishing our credentials first. Then, we'll add our mobile credentials to the administrative role. Now, as we continue our installation, we'll use those credentials to allow the mobile server to access our system. And if you're curious, the admin credential we've created for this non-domain controlled mobile server is only used for server-to-server communication. Normal users logging in with mobile devices to view video will still use their normal Milestone credentials and only be allowed to see the video they're authorized to access. Now, as our installation is completed, we can see the icon representing the mobile server has turned green, and when we return to the management client, we see the mobile server is now present and being controlled. So that's it for the installation. In the next video, we'll cover video storage containers, archiving, and getting the basic system set up.